the way that we do our home finance, like you mentioned, the diminishing musharaka contract is the most widely accepted form of home finance in the country and across the world. So you're right, the biggest complaints were how long it was taking. And sadly, those complaints are still valid with kind of not almost all the other home finance providers in the country.
Is it fair for other people to try and differentiate themselves by saying we're more authentically halal than someone else?
It is extremely upsetting and very personal when somebody will say, actually what you're doing isn't Sharia compliant. And when it's the normal Joe public, I'm okay with that, right? That's just, that's my job to educate them. Where it's upsetting is when it's from fellow so-called practitioners. There's so many parallels I see between UK adoption and UK Islamic finance.
Yeah,
right.
I was about to say.
Yeah, exactly. Because the same thing, imams and some scholars who are giving fatwas and opinions away when they don't really understand the basis behind it, right? There's people who are actually looking to go for Sharia compliant finance who ended up going for interest-based. Because the so-called new authentic unregulated home purchase schemes had years and years of waiting times anyway.
In today's episode, I'm joined by Sagheer Malik, Chief Commercial Officer and Head of Retail Finance at Offa Finance, where he's bringing Islamic finance into the 21st century with their property financing solutions. I'm saying finance a lot there. He has over 20 years of experience within this industry as one of the first employees for Islamic Bank of Britain, now Al Rayan Bank. He gives his take on Islamic finance today, what you as a consumer should be looking for when assessing different property financing solutions, as well as the mixed messages which are being put out by the industry and how to solve for that. We get into a lot in this episode, so stay tuned. As always, I'm your host, Areeb Siddiqui, and this is Muslim Money Talk. Before we begin, we actually noticed only about 10% of you are subscribed to the podcast. So if you like what you're listening to and you want to hear more from us and see more things Muslim and money related, then please consider subscribing and, of course, leaving this episode a like and share it with your friends, leave us a comment or a review, because it really, really does help us out and help more people to find us. Thank you. Now back to the show. Now, before we get into the episode, a really cool discussion happened before the recording actually started around adoption and the adoption crisis happening amongst Muslims in the UK today. So we wanted to leave that clip in. It's not necessarily property finance or Islamic finance related, but it was a really beautiful message. So take a look.
For me, it's dawah as well, because we like Sheikh Sajid, for example, I had to convince him about giving a fatwa on UK adoption.
Yeah.
And he did.
Really?
About kind of, so just very quickly, it's between us, right? Very quickly. So, there's a rule, all the children we've had are under 2, right? And, you're able to give milk. If you're able to give milk, the mahram issue is sorted out. There's no mahram issue. However, Sheikh Tawfiq Chaudhry told me, right? Because I told him, look, the fast check, there's a sad stat out there that children over 2, Muslims, right? They don't get adopted. Yeah, under 2, actually, there's no need. Right? I mean, it's good to get more adopters, but actually, they're well in, there's enough adopters, Muslim adopters for Muslim kids. But over 2, mate, you know how bad the stats are? In some local authorities, right, where there's like 400 Muslim kids put into care last year, like only 10 Muslim carers were able to take care of them, right?
Wow.
Some, it's like 1 in 8, Muslims adopt them. And because they're over 2 years old. And the Sheikh then told me, and I told Sheikh Sajid this, right? And then I got him in touch with a social worker to prove it to him, and then he gave the fatwa as well. Sheikh said, listen, you had a maqadis al-shariah, right? The overriding principle of Islam, right? And number 2, everybody knows about, preservation of life, so where if the only thing keeping you alive is eating pork,
you can do that.
You can eat pork, right? Because preservation of life. But what's number 1? The preservation of wealth comes after. Number 1 is preservation of the faith.
Of the faith, the deen.
Yeah. So if these kids are going to lose their faith, you're able to do things are kind of not permissible. They become permissible for you.
Yeah.
So actually, there's a weak hadith that even if the kid is before puberty, if the mum gives him milk, and through 5 feeds, which can be just a drop, by the way, it can be in a cup or whatever, that's classed as mahramiyah even before puberty. Now, most of the kids that need to get adopted are before puberty, right, and after 2. So I then said to Sheikh, look, man, we've got a big issue. And he said, no, I've not heard that before. But he's obviously a lot of the scholars, they've been taught in the Middle East. So then I got him in touch with a social worker. And Sheikh Sajid, mashallah, is quite open-minded. spoke to the social worker, understood the need, what the process was, and so on. And then he gave the fatwa, said, look, guys, there's a weak hadith out there, there's a precedence. Maqasid al-Sharia, preservation of faith is way more important than this. And the fact is, so for that family, for that person, it becomes permissible. Right? And we set up a scholars helpline of the different madahibs. Wow. From Hanafi, Brailvi, Deobandi, even like to that level, yeah. Okay. From and then from Akhliyati, Salafi, we had that, done where the scholars, you go to your local imam, most of them don't know much, right, about these type of things. And instead of them giving the wrong fatwa, he said, listen, they know, oh, if I need to know something, I know which scholar from my kind of group I can call. Right, and then I can speak to them, and they'll give me the kind of the fatwa for it.
Because I remember with my local, it's exactly as you're saying with local imams. My brother and I were attending our Jummah, and the khutbah that day was about adoption, and the imam mentioned that you cannot adopt.
Yeah, subhanallah.
It's haram to adopt, and then my brother stayed quiet, and then he came to the imam afterwards and said, I have to dispute that because I think there are many options which are available, and there's different fatwas. The imam just didn't want to hear it at all. My brother.
So it's funny you say this. I'll tell you on a story. So I used to do, again, purely for charity, and for my own sake, for my akhirah. I used to do kind of loads of different seminars and groups, to kind of as part of the charity. And one of them was with a group of scholars, and one of the scholars was a mufti, from a Darul Uloom up north. I won't go say anything more. And he had a book written, and in the book he had said something exactly the same: adoption's haram, and fostering's halal. Right? So then I explained in this lecture, a seminar, I said, look, let me ask the scholars here right now. In UK adoption, this is how it works. In UK adoption, you don't have to give them the surname. All right? So you don't have to give them the lineage. Because UK wills are amongst the most flexible in the world, you don't have to let them inherit either. Right? So they don't automatically inherit, right? You can have your will amended so they can get your wasiyah, but they can't inherit the rest, right? Because they're not a biological child. Also, UK adoption recommends that you tell the children that they're adopted from early on, so they know that they're early on. And then you got this, thing with mahramiyya and so on as well. I said, from that perspective, if somebody was to adopt via that route, is that halal? Every one of them said that's halal. Adoption's halal. Now then, in my presentation, I brought up an extract, right, of a book that one of the muftis in the crowd had written, where he categorically said, adoption's haram, fostering's halal. Obviously, I cut out most of it, so it's possible to know who kind of wrote it. I said, guys, here's a book, and I won't mention who it's done, but it's from a renowned mufti in the UK. And I said, look, guys, can you see that? Now, and I explained to him, look, guys, the dangers of giving fatwas without understanding the context, the dangers of giving fatwas without speaking to practitioners, right? Just basically purely on Quranic text or some hadith, but without knowing the context behind even that hadith, right, or the ayah, and how that applies in the UK. So, obviously adoption, in the Quran mentioned adoption's haram, right? And that was because adoption in the Arab times, back then, pre-Islamic times, because Prophet ﷺ adopted, Zayd ibn, right? And his name used to be Zayd ibn Muhammad, right? Because when you adopted back then, the way it worked was that they become part of your lineage, so they take your name, right? And they become like your biological son. And then we know the ayahs came down, we said you can't do that anymore, right? And his name changed to Zayd ibn Haritha. So that part, is point. So, but what is the difference of adoption and fostering in the UK? Difference is permanency.
Yeah.
If you foster someone, it's a temporary thing. Somebody else can come along and adopt them, right? And you lose a child, and that other person could be a non-Muslim ultimately, right? And then therefore a Muslim child now has gone to a non-Muslim and brought up as a non-Muslim. So actually, adoption gives that permanency that nobody can come in ever to take the child away, but you can still bring them up according to UK adoption, according to UK law, and according to Islam, where they don't take a name, they don't take a lineage, they know they're not your biological child and that they are adopted, and so on and so forth, right? And all the scholars agree that that's halal. But that's UK adoption, and that's the problem. There's the same thing that your brother faced. That imam clearly didn't understand what UK adoption can look like. And this is the point of educating the people. And I swear there's so many parallels I see between UK adoption and UK Islamic finance.
Yeah,
right?
I was about to say.
Yeah, exactly. Because the same thing, imams and some scholars who are giving fatwas and opinions away when they don't really understand the basis behind it, right? The basis behind the fatwas given by the top scholars around the world, like Mufti Taqi Uthmani, the late Abdul Fattar Abu-Qudda, rahimahullah, and how they've taken into account UK legislation, regulation, and tax, and so on, and then linked it back to the different hadiths, the practices of Sahabas and Tabi'een, and so on, and ayahs from the Quran to be able to give relevant fatwas. It's a very complex subject, right? And for a proper scholar to give a fatwa on Islamic finance, they don't just need to be an Islamic scholar. They need to be an expert in finance.
Yeah. In many cases, chartered accountants, MBAs.
Or lawyers and so on, exactly, yeah. That's right. And how many out there, how many scholars do we know out there, right, that understand even the basics of finance, let alone the actual complex intricacies of modern finance that exists in the UK and the Western world, yeah? And this is where the danger comes into, about giving fatwas without the background understanding. And the example I give about adoption is quite obviously important to me because I adopted, mashallah, right? And I've been correcting people's views on it. But sadly, the parallels are there for Islamic finance as well. And even zakat. And sadly, the amount of imams, like I'm one of the board advisors to National Zakat Foundation, the amount of imams, that don't understand, sadly, how to calculate zakat in modern times is shocking. And that's also a part of Islamic finance, clearly. And if you don't even understand how to really give advice on what zakat somebody should pay on the different types of assets that they have, how on earth are you going to give them some proper advice and fatwas and viewings on complex products, financial products in the UK? So I think that kind of awareness needs to go out. And I'm sure much of you guys are doing really good. Riba Free, Foundation are doing some really good work as well. We're trying to do that work as well, and have been, alhamdulillah, for the last 20 years. But there's a lot more work to do.
There is, but the change is starting. The change is happening, and all started over 20 years ago with the likes of yourself and the others who set up IBB. But let's get into it. Sagheer, assalamu alaikum. And welcome to Muslim Money Talk. How are you?
Walaikum assalam, Areeb. Alhamdulillah, very good. Thank you for coming down today.
No, thank you for hosting us in your offices right here in Birmingham. It's our second or third time on the road with this show, and it's our first time in Birmingham in sunny Solihull. Today, so you've got a beautiful space here with there's 30 people out there. Or
They are. We're expanding quickly. So as I mentioned earlier, we're actually looking for either expanding, getting more office space within this building, or moving into a different building. So mashallah, we've more than doubled the size from last year, and we're looking to double again this year.
Incredible.
So a lot of good work, but also a lot of bit of stress as well, in trying to find the right type of people.
Yeah, of course. There's so much I want to talk to you about today, from your background, your history in Islamic finance, what you're doing with Offa Finance today, and where you see the industry going, as well as some of the juicier bits, which is your response to some of the criticisms around this industry in general.
Sure.
But before we do all that, I always like to ask this question: is this what you imagined you'd be doing as a child in Islamic finance?
Not at all. Growing up, I'm in my 40s now. Growing up, there was no concept of Islamic finance when I was a child. No one had heard of it. And education on even riba was quite minimal. So my interest actually was in tech. I was always interested in computing, and then eventually went in uni. I studied computing for business. So that was where I kind of saw my career going into. When I started learning about kind of computing and coding and so on at uni, I realized actually I was less interested in that side of computing and more interested into the business side of in IT, and that's why I kind of changed my degree into computing for IT in Aston. Nice. And so but growing up, very much interested of trying to get into tech.
Yeah, but you grew up here in Birmingham.
Yep.
Went to Aston University.
That's right.
Fantastic. And then you found yourself as one of the, if I'm correct in saying, one of the first employees at what was Islamic Bank of Britain at the time.
Oh yeah, I joined Islamic Bank of Britain in September 2004, right? Okay. And the bank that month, or just a month before, received its license as a bank. And it was the first bank of any kind to get a UK banking license in over 50 years. Right? Huge. It was a huge deal, right? Yeah. And obviously the first bank, Islamic bank in the Western world, right? Yeah. It's a huge deal. And I joined, I was approached by them, and it was quite a junior role as a call center agent. And I thought, I've just left uni, I'm looking for a job. Let's just try it out. And the interview process was crazy. It was such a tough interview, right? And then I actually had to ask them, because it was like, 2 or 3 stage interview. And, I was interviewed by the executives, and I said, guys, you just want to understand, I am applying for a call center agent role. So this is not a graduate scheme or anything else. What's going on? And I remember them telling us, and it's something that it's stuck with me forever, and something that I'm doing in Offa now as well, which is that the people we're hiring right now, we're expecting some of these people to become the future leaders of Islamic Bank of Britain, IBB. So, okay, it might be a junior role right now, but you guys could be the future leaders, could be the ones running the company.
Absolutely.
And alhamdulillah, that is what happened, not just with me, but a few others as well. Alhamdulillah, right? So, and I've taken that concept with Offa now as well. When we set this up, and I mean, last year we had 13 staff. Now we've got 30. Next year, end of this year, we'll have about 60 odd.
Sure.
That's the kind of rigorous kind of employment checks that we're doing right now. Make it with the mindset that some of the people that we're bringing on board today could be the future leaders, future heads of, future executives.
Incredible.
Of Offa.
No, I love that ethos. It's something we've already adopted at Kestrl as well, in that some of our first employees were interns or grads straight out of university. And they were very junior. What we were really looking for was a drive, a willingness to learn, and just kind of that humility to understand that, okay, you're not going to know everything, but we can take you on that journey. And subhanAllah, some of them are leading departments in the company now, running their own projects with their own client base. So alhamdulillah, it's really something we try and push for at Kestrl as well.
Alhamdulillah. And it's important because those early days, I think the one advice I would give you then, in that regard, and something that I went through, is that especially those kind of young graduates that that you think have got the potential to go forward. The key thing is to give them mentorship. And alhamdulillah, I was extremely blessed to have amazing mentors. So my first mentor, actually at 21, when I started working there, was the late Azhar Khan.
Really?
Yeah, that's right. So Azhar Khan and our chairman Sultan Chaudhry, they were the actual founders of Riyan Bank, right? The directors there, and then Sultan obviously became the CEO. And Azhar he was my line, head at that time. And he took an interest in me, and it gave me some really good mentoring, and some of it was really tough love.
Really?
And as they say, sometimes medicine's a bitter pill to swallow, right? And I didn't like it at the time, but always appreciated it for him, and we became very close friends, afterwards as well. So that was a big deal, getting that type of mentorship from Azhar. I grew up in like a very much working class background from an area in Birmingham called Balsa Leith. So had no real exposure to the corporate world. So this was the first exposure I had. And to get that kind of mentorship was amazing. And also to see a practicing Muslim, who was performing at such a high level in the corporate world. It's the first time I'd come across that.
Because was there this idea, I think a lot of us have this growing up as well, especially those of us who are a bit older, which is that piety does not equate to being rich. Like if you're pious, you're kind of poor in some way. Was that really your mindset growing up?
Oh, massively. Sadly, that was the mindset, right? And then once you start learning about Islam, you realize of the top 10 Sahabas who were guaranteed heaven, most of them were millionaires.
7 or 8 of them.
Yeah, exactly. If not even
billionaires.
If not even billionaires, exactly. The point I was going to make. So, and sadly, that is what I grew up around. And also, sadly, the type of Islam I was learning when I was growing up as well was kind of very mystical and very kind of non-pragmatic, right? And he put me off the religion, I'll be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah, growing up, I was very much into it as a child. And then, I don't want to go into the specifics of it, but a lot of things kind of saw a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of stuff that didn't make sense. And he put me off the religion. And so meeting Azhar and then also meeting Sultan, right, where there's two very practicing, very proud and open Muslims, weren't hiding the Islam, but also extremely successful in the corporate world as well. It kind of reignited that passion for Islam, and allowed me to kind of start learning about the religion and properly practicing. And the reason, and I've still obviously stayed in touch with Sultan. Now we're both business partners.
Of course.
But the loyalty for me has always been there with him because of those early days, right?
Yeah.
From somebody at that time, sadly, who wasn't practicing, from then learning about Islam, learning about it, from the right ways, and then getting into all the different charity works I got into. And like I said earlier, even the journey from me to the position now where I've adopted my children, it all started from that day, from properly learning about the religion, practicing. and and getting involved in different charity work, helping set up this kind of Muslim fostering adoption charity, it led me to actually adopting my own children, actually, right? So mashallah, yes, so extremely grateful for my time there, not just from a professional perspective, where I developed a lot, but more importantly, as a Muslim and as a man as well.
It changed the trajectory of your life,
Yeah.
it sounds like. And for people who don't know, the late Azhar Khan, he passed away, unfortunately, just a few months ago.
That's right.
He was, most recently, his role was as CFO of FIDA at the time, I believe.
That's right.
I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I was at a meeting where many people were sharing stories about him and the impact that he'd left on them. And I was wondering, is there like one lesson or takeaway that you want to share?
Azhar, and I mean, he's passed away now, so I can't talk about it, right? But I would never say this when he was alive. Was amongst the most generous people I've ever met. So I did his finance applications like I did for a lot of people. And I remember speaking to him at one point, saying, Azhar, look at the amount of charity you're giving. And I know the hadith of charity, the more you give, the more you'll get back. Yeah. And I'm looking at it, saying, Azhar, on an affordability basis here, you have to go through it. The amount of charity you're giving is going to make it quite tight to affordability, right? Really? And obviously, we were able to approve it anyway. But the point was, I've never seen anyone giving that level of charity away. And I don't mean as an amount of charity. I'm talking about as a percentage of income. Wow. I've never come across that. And mashallah, look, I've done more home purchase plan kind of originations and advice than anybody. Originated over £1 billion, through my career and through my teams. And I've never come across anyone who gives away that level, that amount of charity as a percentage of income ever. Most generous person ever. And not just with money, but with his time as well. And for him to give me that time early on in my career when I was a 21-year-old kind of, entry-level staff member, shows the level of generosity and the effort they put in trying to kind of help me, groom me into the kind of person I'm today was amazing. So yeah, I mean, that would be the one thing, the big lesson for me would be the generosity, not just in time, in charity. I mean, he was also, one of the trustees of Charity Right. He was also involved in the Waqf that me and Sultan were involved in. He was also involved in, so many different charities we've been involved in as well. He's donated all the charities I've ever been involved in as well, and there's so many people out there. I mean, it'd be hard to find a charity that he hasn't donated to. Yeah. So, mashallah, yeah. So that I would say, trust in Allah and be generous with your wealth and with your time, and you will get the barakah back. And look at the legacy he's left behind.
Especially when he was taken too soon, but despite that,
the legacy's been phenomenal. And then I was lucky actually that my other mentor was Sultan. So eventually I started reporting to him, and his mentorship was very different to Azhar's, right? His was intense. Like he's like just push you and push you and push you, right? Until the brink of disaster, and then just pull you back again, and then push you again. and I massively appreciated that. And I think that's what I've tried to do throughout my career as well. And alhamdulillah, I've also, I've some stories where I've got staff members now even working for me, and other companies that I hired, I was able to mentor. And I'm privileged to say that if I look at all the Islamic finance, the top Islamic finance brokerages, the top Islamic finance institutions, a lot of the key staff working there, they were hired by me.
Really?
Right? Some Islamic banks out there right now, or even conventional banks that do some Islamic kind of window, some of the top staff out there were hired by me.
Wow.
And so on. So alhamdulillah, that was something again inculcated into me by the late Azhar and also Sultan. Yeah, and that's the advice I would give to you. So I'm sure you are doing it, but to put in a bigger kind of emphasis if you can.
Absolutely, into that mentorship.
That's right.
So tell me what it was like at the time, because it was 2003, 2004. You were the first Islamic bank in the Western world to have opened up. What was the reaction like? And also, you guys launched the first home financing product, the first buy-to-let.
First buy-to-let product, yes.
First buy-to-let product in the UK.
That's right. So me and Sultan were involved in launching our first buy-to-let product.
Incredible. So I want to know, what was the vibe like? How were you guys feeling? Was it stressful? Was it exciting? Was it a bit of both? And what was the reaction like from the public?
It was exciting, and I think it's become easier ever since. So that was the toughest time to talk about Islamic finance. It was new, and we were faced with a lot of criticism. A lot of people saying that it's all fake and so on, because it was so new, and because no one had really come across Islamic finance.
Plus, there was a bank before which had collapse.
Yeah, so this is a big thing.
BCCI.
Yeah, BCCI.
Yeah.
So this is a problem. So it wasn't regulated, and this is the issue that
It wasn't.
It wasn't, right? And this is the issue that we're facing now, sadly, with this new kind of unregulated home purchase schemes that are coming out, right? The dangers of it are phenomenal. So that bank, the Pakistani bank that came in the UK, was not regulated. A lot of our dad generations, right, were very familiar with it. It was way before. I mean, I must have been like in my nappies at the time, or kind of very young when all that kind of stuff happened. And I don't know the exact details of it, if you collapsed or whatever, but ultimately it kind of, a lot of people lost a lot of money, from the investments and financing and so on that they put in there. And so it left that bad taste. And I remember, we had to be given a script so we understood what was BCCI. We had to be taught about it. And it was just explained to him, guys, that was a non-regulated entity, right? The level of scrutiny and accountability just wasn't there. I mean, just give an example about Offa now. We heard, very recently, we received, we become regulated.
Congratulations.
By the FCA on our Islamic home purchase plans, which are the Islamic equivalent of mortgages. And, this, Areeb, but what does it mean to be regulated? The level of accountability that you have is phenomenal, right? Not only do customers have an opportunity to complain about us to the regulator directly, if they weren't happy with us, but actually we are personally liable, not just from a job perspective, but we can be fined and even given custodial sentences, right? That's not what you get. That level of accountability with these unregulated schemes, right? And we're audited internally, we're audited externally, and we're audited by the regulator as well. And, and with people in Offa whose literally necks are on the line, because if anything was to go wrong, even if something didn't go wrong, but you didn't have the right controls in place to prevent something going wrong, you could get those fines and sentences.
Wow.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that something bad happened, just that, if you didn't have the right controls in place, you're lucky something bad didn't happen. But because you didn't have those preventative measures, we're still coming after you. So that's the problem. That's what BCCI didn't have, and that's a lot of issues I have right today with some of the new kind of unregulated home purchase plan schemes where they're not regulated. And do consumers understand the importance of that? I don't think they do.
But at the time, you guys getting your license, did consumers appreciate that? And did they understand the difference between that and BCCI?
Well, look, the reality is, and not just with Muslims, across the UK, there was a mortgage market review done not long ago by the UK regulator, when they found out that over 90% of the UK population, everybody, most of 90% of them are not financially savvy enough to choose a mortgage product themselves, that they need advice for it. That just gives you an example about the lack of financial now. So a lot of people really didn't know, they didn't understand, the implications of having a license, having a banking license, how big of a deal it was and so on. We tried to educate them, and look, like anything, it takes time, right? And it took quite a bit of time. I remember we were having our calls, at the call center back then and the branches, they were like 40 minutes on average, and it was just about explaining about what we do, how's it Islamic, how are we safe, and so on. But I don't regret that time. I really enjoyed looking back at it. I miss it, because that based the foundation of what we had as people and as an organization, and the level we got to now, alhamdulillah, was because of those times. Vibe was amazing. It was we were pioneers in the frontier land. It was amazing. It was tough. Mistakes were made as well, as expected. Like I said, first bank in over 50 years to be set up of any type. So who can you go to for advice in certain areas and so on, right?
What mistakes do you think were there?
So look, I think, I want to be kind of quite candid in that it's quite easy, after we got the power of hindsight, to look back and do it, right? And the industry would never be in the position it's in right now. Because mashallah, we've got so many Islamic kind of finance providers out there, including yourself, from various different home finance to kind of, savings to, personal finance, exactly, from current accounts and pay wallet, e-wallets and so on. Wouldn't have happened without that work that was done in the early days,
For sure.
And so, but ultimately, various different things. I mean, ideally, we would have been able to put a lot more focus on technology. We would have, but the issue was we could have developed the products, a bit better from day one. But obviously, ultimately, we learned those lessons and we were able to amend the products.
Because you guys were moving at breakneck speed at the time. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize, but for a bank to get its license, get the funding that you did, launch that buy-to-let product.
Well, so remember, we launched a current account, savings account first, the first savings account, right?
Yeah.
We launched a current account. We launched our home purchase plan product, the Islamic residential, home finance product. Then the buy-to-let. And before that, actually, we launched commercial property finance, right? Yeah. We launched ISAs,
and then you also listed on AIM, the stock exchange's AIM exchange.
Exactly.
Which is kind of crazy, right? Yeah. Had it happened today, it would have been worldwide news. People would have been picking it up.
Yeah, and it was actually at the time. There was a lot of news, and we opened up 8 branches. So again, one of the things in hindsight, we shouldn't have opened up the branch network so quickly and so expansively, right? Instead, that money should have gone more onto, building a better tech platform. Sure. Like the kind of ones that you've got and the kind of ones that we've built now. Whatever the equivalents back then, that's what we should have put the money into, as opposed to this kind of branch network. Yeah. But again, these are lessons we learned. The other issue again was, it wasn't just the management team, right? It was the limitations of the shareholders as well, of what you could and couldn't do. So that was again quite an important aspect when we set up Offa, was about one, having the right management team, and also then having the right type of shareholders that would allow you to do what you need to get done as well. So if remember, the shareholders generally for most Islamic finance institutions are Middle Eastern, and the industry there is very different to the industry here, right? One is tiny and actually it's less sophisticated in the UK kind of market, and it's just having that. And at that time, the problem was there was nobody ultra credible, right? Because there was a guy called Michael Hanlon, who had set up a bank in Poland, right? An old kind of English man, didn't really know anything about, modern kind of, tech banking and so on. And the rest of the guys, like Sultan, Azhar, and myself, we were untested, right, in that market as bankers. And so when these ideas were coming out, it was easy for the likes of the people at the time to kind of reject them, to bat them away. No, we know what we're talking about. The difference today, when we set up Offa was, actually we are, alhamdulillah, the most experienced Islamic finance executive team in the UK, right? With accolades of being the first ones to do a 100% asset-backed sukuk, being the first ones to launch an Islamic bank, first ones to get a credit rating, originating the most home finance and so on and so forth. So the new shareholders that we were able to get, it was a totally different dynamic. There's a lot of respect there and a lot of freedom given as to what we need to do.
Thank you for listening to Muslim Money Talk. If you like what you've heard so far, you might be interested in checking out what we do at Kestrl, the Muslim Money app. Kestrl is a service that helps Muslims who want to grow their wealth without having to compromise, whether it's on their belief or user experience or price. I founded Kestrl because of how fed up I was at how poor Islamic financial services were in this country. Often people didn't use them because of how bad the user experience or customer service, and indeed how high on price they were. So Kestrl was the answer to that. If you download the Kestrl app today, it can help you by creating a budgeting plan. Plug in whatever bank account you have and it will create an auto budget just for you. You can then tell us what goals you're saving for and we'll save towards them automatically into pots, and then crucially link you towards Sharia compliant investment and savings products as well. So download Kestrl today and try it out for yourself. Now back to the podcast.
And this is what I wanted to say, because it sounds like all of the lessons that you guys learned through that wild ride that was Islamic Bank of Britain, now Al-Rayyan Bank, you're kind of taking and applying directly into what you guys do today at Offa. So if it's okay, let's go on to that. Yeah. So Offa Finance. Firstly, why the name Offa?
Yeah, well, I actually love the name. I'm a proud Brummie, as you know, you're Birmingham. and myself, Sultan, and I'm one of the founders, Bilal, and one of the directors. We're all born in Birmingham. Okay. And so come from this area. And our fourth partner, Amir, was a CFO. He's Malaysian, but he's settled in Birmingham. His kids are, he's based in Birmingham, mashallah, right? So, so we were basically, promised. King Offa Offa is named after a king in the 8th century in the UK. And he was based in Mercia, basically in the Midlands, right? So he got effectively a Brummie. And at the time, he was the most powerful king in the UK, right? His kingdom was from Manchester to parts of Wales, all the way to London and Birmingham. And he did the trade deal with the Muslims, with the Abbasid Empire based in Spain.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was the first time Muslims came to the UK, all right? It was also the first time an Islamic finance transaction was done, because to commemorate the trade deal, a gold dinar was made, and on one side it said King Offa in Latin, and the other side was a shahada. Right, and that coin, by the way, if you want to Google it, it's in the British Museum. You can see it there right now. And it was found at the Staffordshire Hoard, not long ago as well. I think probably about 8 to 10 years ago, and so on. So we love that. So here's a guy, he's a Brummie. It's the first time Muslims came to the UK, first time Islamic finance was done, and actually that dinar was available to be used by everybody, right? Not just by Muslims, but non-Muslims. And Islamic finance is for everybody. And so what we wanted to show was that Islam and Islamic finance isn't something new.
Yeah.
It's actually something very old, right? It's 8th century.
Yeah.
That's how far back it goes. So, and that's where we took the name. And actually, mashallah, for some of our products, about 44% of our customers are not Muslim.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what we wanted to say. Go with a name that is, doesn't maybe sound Islamic, but is intrinsically linked to Islam, right? To show that, again, we're proud Muslims, we're proud, Brits, and we're proud Brummies ultimately, right? And our product and our company is the same, and it's available to everybody, Muslim and non-Muslim alike.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll have to do more research into that. Like, what a forward-thinking king from the 700s.
Yeah, exactly.
Effectively willing to do business with anyone. I think a lot of lessons could be learned by some of the people today who are talking, complaining about Muslims coming into this country and taking their jobs.
Exactly. Right.
We'll have to check out that coin. Incredible. So then Offa kind of came in to solve a problem that was there in that. I think at a report or a stat I saw just a couple of years ago, Islamic mortgages, whether it was buy-to-let or retail, I can't remember, but were one of the most complained about products, financial products on the market in the UK.
100%.
So how does Offa directly tackle that? Because I think some of the complaints were around slow decision-making, excessive and often unnecessary documents, the fact that you needed 2 lawyers in some cases to opine, and just how long that process took. How are you guys fixing that? So
thank you. So this is exactly why we kind of joined Offa, bought into Offa, and then were able to raise the funds, with the new shareholders we brought in, which are called Islamic Investments. I was part, of one of those companies, right, that where we used to get lots of complaints about and so on. And the root cause was quite simple. The processes, the technology wasn't brilliant, and it was extremely difficult to get those changed, and updated. And that's why the ultimate Offa came about. Offa actually came about as being the first Sharia compliant bridge finance provider. And when we joined, we wanted to expand that into all sorts of property financing. So we spent a lot of money on the tech. And alhamdulillah, myself, as being the biggest expert in Islamic home finance in the country, with my team and the other executives, Sultan and Amir, were able to fix that problem. And we've done that now, alhamdulillah. So you're right, the biggest complaints were how long it was taking. And sadly, those complaints are still valid with kind of not almost all the other home finance providers in the country. And you know that, you're probably a customer of theirs, you speak to enough people out there, that, future brokers, that's the case, right? Things haven't really changed much.
Every single customer interview we've done, where it's someone who's taken out a retail mortgage, nearly like 90% of people say that they almost lost the deal because of how long it took for them to get approved.
Exactly. It got to the point where estate agents were putting off customers when they found out that they're taking out the property through Islamic home finance, right? Yeah. Because of how long it would take. And like I said, that's still happening today. What we did was we've designed a system now, alhamdulillah, where based on tech, most of our customers, as long as you've lived in the property for 3 years and you register for voting, we've got enough data about you that the information will shoot into a credit engine. And I know we've got loads of, obviously I'm going to proprietary information, but we've got loads of APIs built with kind of different providers and the tech that we have internally, that we're able to make a decision the same day for you without requiring almost any documents. So if you're refinancing, we don't need your pay slips, we don't need your bank statements, we don't need your passport. We'll just give you the decision to get approved or not there and then that day. If you're looking to buy a new property, the only document in most cases we need from you is a bank statement to show your proof of funds, right, where your deposits coming from. Now, our average time to take so far this month for a decision is 3 hours. Right, your average time to make a decision in the last 3 months is basically under half a day. So basically, the same day you apply, with minimal or no documents, we're able to give a decision. Other issue that you get with the other Islamic finance providers is one is a whole host of documents you need. Yeah. I'll give an example. A lot of them will need 3 months bank statements of every single bank account that you have, right? Even a bank account that you have a nil balance on, even a bank account that you've had some money in for a long time and whatnot. Why is that relevant? Why do they need to know that level of information, right? And it's quite hard to get that as well, especially if it's a nil balance account that you haven't used for quite a while. Trying to get bank statements for that is quite difficult. Delays the process. And then they ask you a lot of questions. Some of them are quite stupid. I mean, I've got somebody very close to me who applied recently, and they were asking them, "Oh, we can see some credits into your account. What are they?" And it's quite clear. It says refund from just say Next, like a shop, right? So the answer back was the refund from some clothes we returned back, right? For Next, they accepted the answer and moved on, right? But why even delay? Wait for 2 days to assess the application, delay, answer comes back, and it takes another 2 days to reassess the application, right? So that's the first thing, where it takes weeks sometimes to get decisions. You can get it with us within a few hours, actually. Second part is, then how long does it take to get an offer? So an average for us, mashallah, is within a week, normally about up to 8 days, The next big issue, so that's the one issue, is underwriting, right? And honestly, I had so many complaints that you've heard. And I won't mention some of the things that people said. Do you want this off me? Do you want blood? Do you want this measurement? And so, what else do you want from me? And I can't even, some of the stuff wasn't even Sharia compliant, right? So you can't mention it. But that's the level of frustration people had. So alhamdulillah, we fixed that. We got to the point where not only is Offa faster and simpler and easier, and quicker to get finance and other Islamic finance providers, but also, and not just the kind of the regulated ones, but also from these new unregulated home purchase schemes, right? We're faster, but we're actually better and quicker and faster than any high street bank in the country as well. The second big issue is when it gets to the conveyancing process, right? So, which is the lawyers. So all other Islamic finance providers require you to go for 2 different lawyers.
Why is that?
So ultimately, how it works in the conventional world is that basically, you go for one lawyer, and that lawyer would act on the behalf of the bank and act on behalf of the customer, and it's resolved. With home finance, because we buy their property, right, and we own it, right, in partnership with you, right, and then we sell our property back to you, right, and so because of the additional risk we're taking because we own the property, a lot of these other financial Islamic financial institutions just want to take the extra coverage for the risk, right? By saying we want our lawyer to do all the checks as well to make sure everything's in line.
Right.
But we've been there, done that, right? We know what kind of risks they are. We know how to design our contracts and so on. And the guidelines we've done, right? That actually we can trust the lawyers to act on our behalf. So we're the only ones out there, that give the same level of ease as conventional providers, where one lawyer, instead of having 2, would act on both their behalf. So it's less toing and froing, less delays, and lower costs involved as well.
Because the contract that you guys use, the form, it's a diminishing musharaka contract, I believe.
That's right.
That's basically a co-ownership.
Co-ownership, yes.
With the buyer. You yourselves offer, as well as the buyer, you're co-owning this. And then over time, they will purchase, through their repayments, they'll purchase back more and more of the thing over time. But every other player out there, all the other Islamic players, felt that you needed 2 lawyers, one to represent the buyer and one to represent yourself.
Because of the fact that they own the property, like we do, right? And that's because they just, I guess, haven't got the level of confidence or understanding like we do. We've been there, we've been there doing the long distance market. We understand it better, and we've designed, the processes, the risks, so the risks are mitigated, and the confidence therefore is there to do it.
It's a consequence of the tech that you're using as well as your experience.
Exactly
in doing this effectively. Okay, fantastic. I want to move into something that I know you're very passionate about. I don't know if you remember how we first met.
Well, the most memorable one is at the Lord Mayor show.
The Lord Mayor show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think, Albert, we can put up here. There's a picture taken from BBC where Sagheer and I are walking in the streets in London at the Lord Mayor's parade. Sorry.
That's right.
And Brother Majid Dawood was very kind enough to give us a slot in this Islamic finance float that had been set up, which is basically us walking with these flags on our backs. That's right. With our logos.
Representing Islamic finance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we first met, you were talking so passionately about something that you felt was going on at the time, in that there was almost, amongst all these new players, some people who were marketing themselves as more authentically Sharia compliant than others. Is that the biggest challenge you're facing now? In that we've spoken to other people about this, Mohammed Baracha, Mufti Faraz Adam, and gotten their takes, and people can check out previous videos. But I'd love to hear your view on that as a practitioner, to just as a response. Is it fair for other people to try and differentiate themselves by saying we're more authentically halal than someone else?
Yeah, no. So thank you for asking the question. Yeah, and I'm very passionate about that. Look, because I'm not some kind of, and to make it clear to everybody, I've never taken out conventional finance. I've never worked in conventional providers, right? Alhamdulillah, I've been, blessed and privileged enough that, I've stuck with Islamic finance, right? So my income has been, alhamdulillah, halal throughout my life. And I've had opportunities throughout my career to get massive pay rises. At one point, double, I had a job offer, which was double the income, right? By working for conventional, and I turned it down, and I've turned down loads of other opportunities because to keep my income halal, and that's not just me. I'm not the sole person in that. There's so many of my colleagues and who've been through that same journey, right? Where some have actually left conventional, taken pay cuts to go to Islamic, and some same as me who've turned away kind of big kind of pay rises and promotions to keep the income halal. So it is extremely upsetting and very personal when somebody will say, actually what you're doing isn't Sharia compliant. And when it's the normal Joe public, I'm okay with that, right? That's just, that's my job to educate them. Where it's upsetting is when it's from fellow so-called practitioners, right? So if people want to say that they're more authentic, fine, right? That's, that's their kind of take on it, and we've got our own take on it as well. But my bigger concern is, and again, I'm sure my views are probably in line with Mufti Faraz Adam and also with Muhammad Farashi as well, where it is actually, and it should be taken personally, because I know the dangers and I know the issues with riba, waging war with Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, and all the kind of hadiths are extremely harsh. The only time Prophet ﷺ was, the harshest language he ever used was when explaining riba, right? And so to be accused of that, right, after sacrifices that I've made and other colleagues have made, right, and sometimes you even get a backlash from your kind of wider network and your friends and your family, just saying, why are you kind of turning away this level of money and job opportunity, right? When it's the same thing in their heads. So you take the backlash, you go through this kind of hardship, and then to be accused of, oh, what you're doing isn't Sharia compliant, for people that should know better is very upsetting. Yeah, and that's why, I am very passionate about it. I'm not as diplomatic as some other people out there right now, so I'm very open and happy to be very open about it with people as well. And that's why it's very rarely does anyone come to me to my face and say that. It's normally they'll go on podcasts and go on other places, right? And say it, but when they see me, they will never, right? And sometimes they'll actually twist it, in oh no, that's not what I meant. I meant this, I meant that, right? Because because they know what they're doing is wrong. And especially if you look at, some of the people have actually studied Islam, and that's the kind of the sad thing about it, right? You have more accountability with more knowledge that you have, right? So because you should know better. That's why I said I don't get offended when a layperson says there or a non-practitioner, because that's expected from them. I get more offended when it's a practitioner or somebody that should know better. And look, what areas in fiqh muamalat do you get consensus on? We can't even get consensus on what day Ramadan starts, what day Eid is, yeah? Can't get consensus on what type of food is halal, like this body is stunned, unstunned, and so on. In so many areas it isn't. And what we know is that they are differences of opinion. There's some that are legitimate differences of opinion as well, right? And the way that we do our home finance, like you mentioned, the diminishing musharaka contract is the most widely accepted form of home finance in the country and across the world.
Globally,
yeah, right? Sure. Like I said, the likes of Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi, the late Sheikh Abu Sattar Al-Qudda, they've approved these concepts, right, that we're using right now. Yeah, the type of concept we're using right now. And so, how can you then say that your niche view, your view, which is an outlier, right, is actually the only halal position available? It's wrong. It's actually irresponsible, right, to get that done. And then it's causing fitna. And secondly, you say it's more authentic, right? And I'll talk to you a bit more about how is it more authentic, and the kind of examples I gave, they're erroneous, and I'm happy to explain that in more detail later on. If you want.
Yeah, please do. I think having spoken to a few people on this topic from both sides of it, on this show and also outside of this, just privately, I really, really believe that the main issue amongst the public
Yeah.
themselves is just about cost and convenience.
Yeah.
I think when people say, okay, I'm a Muslim, let me find an Islamic alternative, they go out there and they look at the Orions and the gatehouses and whoever else it might be. And then they're faced with poor digital services, really long time periods when they're applying for financing. And then beyond that, something which is often more expensive, sometimes 2 to 3 times more expensive than a conventional provider. And then in their minds, they start looking for a way out. Okay, is this really Islamic? Is there a fatwa saying I can go for a conventional instead? But I think if you were to remove those layers, and like mashallah, there are different people out there. We created Kestrl on the basis of making things more digitally convenient for people.
Exactly.
You did exactly the same with Offa, right? Then I think if you remove that cost barrier as well, I think the rebukes and the contentions from the public just will die. I think they will go away.
You're spot on. You're spot on. And just to answer the original question, is that our major challenge? It's not. I mean, our major challenge actually is more about, like I said, just trying to educate the community so they understand it better, and so we can get more people coming on board and trying to reduce prices and so on. But this is becoming more of a challenge. And the sad situation is, something I mentioned right at the beginning, that things are much easier today than they were over 20 years ago when we started kind of offering Islamic finance products, because education, alhamdulillah, for Muslims has been getting better and better. Education for Muslim scholars and imams has been improving as well. And it's becoming more acceptable. You get less kind of questions being asked, and the questions we do ask are more sophisticated. They're not the kind of really basic questions we used to be asked before. But recently, sadly, with this kind of trend of, pushing that, everything else is not Sharia compliant and this is, it's actually doing the opposite effect. And sadly, I can honestly tell you, Mufti Faraz will tell you the same story because we come across the same customers. There's people who are actually looking to go for Sharia compliant finance who ended up going for interest-based, because the so-called new authentic unregulated home purchase schemes had years and years of waiting times anyway. So they thought, well, I can't go for those because I've been told they're the only ones that are Sharia compliant. And I would have been happy to go for the standard Sharia compliant products, the regulated ones, but I don't want to go there because I've been told they're not halal, so I might as well go for conventional, right? And I'm sure no one meant that, even though the guys, who are spouting this stuff didn't want those people, anyone, to go for conventional finance, but that's the end result. And what's happening now is, for the first time ever in the last year or so, I've seen the level of, of education effectively going backwards, and so I think people need to use a bit of hikmah here, right? What's the purpose of causing this confusion, and division? What's the purpose of it? What are you trying to achieve, right? You haven't got a product that you can sell because it's not available, the funding isn't available, product's not regulated. And is that the way you want to sell it? Is that the way, by calling everybody else not halal, right? When actually the majority of you is the other way around, right? That those products are the most authentic out there right now. So yeah, it is quite sad, and it's not a massive problem right now. But if this continues, it could become a big problem.
And at Kestrl, we deal with the public a lot. We talk with a lot of customers. We're sensing that confusion.
Okay.
And home financing, particularly in the retail space, is the most desired product amongst Muslims in the Western world, and it has the most confusion around it. Right? People get very passionate. People get very upset about it as well. So I think the sooner we can all come together and just reach a consensus and some understanding on it, and just have a one singular message that goes out to the public, just the better for everyone in general. So we don't have people who are just going for conventional products. Agreed.
And I think this is where you've heard me speak to you about this and other practitioners. What we would love to do would be put funding into kind of non-branded, it's just generic Islamic finance training across the board, right? I used to be a scout leader,
no way.
Yeah.
Muslim
Scouts, right, in Birmingham. And actually the largest Muslim Scouts group in Birmingham, which happened to be the second largest scout group of any kind in Birmingham.
Wow.
And one of the things we used to do was, train people on budgeting and so on, kids, right? And they used to get a badge for kind of finance. But because we're a Muslim Scouts group, I could add on content about Islamic finance as well. And I remember teaching people, they sent the kids were between about 12 to 14 years old, this particular group were. And I remember the next week, the next session, the parents coming up to me, asking me, can I deliver the same training to them, right?
Wow.
And that wasn't really surprise me because, even the UK regulator and other kind of UK bodies have noticed that the level of financial literacy and education amongst adults in the UK is extremely poor, and more needs to be done. And so the same would be the case for Islamic finance. It's probably worse actually, because that information is less readily available. So what we need to do really as an industry is invest more time and money in just creating, kind of. And like with yourself, like what you're doing as well, creating resources for educating Muslims.
Yeah.
And I'm happy for all of us to pool money into a non-branding type of training. Right? We're just teaching them about Islamic finance.
For sure.
And then once they know about it, which product they want to go for, which provider, that's their choice. Right? But going about in what's the trend that I see happening right now isn't helping anybody. It's counterproductive. And the issue is that, look, we speak to regulators all the time, right? We were involved in helping the HMT recently, making changes to taxation, to kind of making Islamic finance fairer for Muslims by getting it on par with conventional finance.
Because a big issue was the stamp duty
and capital gains tax
and capital gains taxes.
Right? And it's hard to talk to them, because when the government and the different regulatory bodies will come back and say, well, guys, I've got a lot of work to do. I'm a public-owned body. So limited resources, right? How much demand is it for this stuff? Anyway?
That's the question, yeah.
How much demand is it?
Yeah.
And if it's worthwhile, I'll put my resources there. Because right now, my priority is all about the amount of demand that's needed. And I've got so much work to do, not enough resources. And we know that's the case with the government, right?
Yeah.
And the different government bodies. So we need to create the demand so we can make more changes, right? To make the Islamic finance products better. And you can't do that if less people are interested in it. So what we should be doing as an industry generally is working together to create more demand, right, for people, so that we can create better products, so we can lobby the government and get them to take us more seriously at whether it's a regulator, the legislator, whether it's HMT, whatever they are, to make those changes that we need to make. But you can't get that done until the demand is there, right?
Exactly.
And that's where, and I think the work that's been done by some people right now, it is counterproductive. And the sad thing is they should know better, right? Because they have some Islamic education, some Islamic finance education. So that is why I'm very passionate about it. And it's upsetting. On a separate point, and I think that is worthwhile mentioning, I think right now, is about the issue of regulations. Right? Why do we spend the last 2 years, right, spending a lot of time and money ensuring that we get regulated products, right, and also ensuring that other products we offer, like buy-to-let, bridge financing, and so on, development financing, refurbishment, so that they within a regulatory framework. Why? Because, as stuff I mentioned earlier, the Muslims deserve the same level of protection, right, and the same level of confidence, knowing that we're under the same level of scrutiny as non-Muslims or anybody else who's going for conventional finance. And I give an example of this. So there was, this, and I won't mention the name of the company, right, but sadly, there was an investment scheme recently, right, that was approved by a lot of scholars and so on, and which turned out to be a Ponzi scheme, a scam. And Muslims lost, what was it, in excess of £10 million?
10 million, yeah.
Right? And people went, and it's an unregulated scheme, right? Why would you invest your money into an unregulated scheme? Right? And also you have to understand, like we mentioned earlier, scholars, mashallah, they are experts in Islam. They are not experts in financial services schemes, right? Whether Islamic or otherwise. And that's a fact. Just because a scholar has said, oh, this product is halal, right? Or this product is good, doesn't mean that actually it's a safe product either. So you need a combination. Freely, ideally, you need to get scholars who are experts in Islamic finance and expertise in financial services.
Like Mufti for us.
Like Mufti for us. Which is one of our scholars.
Yeah, people with those qualifications are kind of few and far between.
Exactly right. That's one. And second thing then, to get extra protection is it regulated? Right? How do you know your money is safe? How do you know what's happening to your money? How do you know the marketing material, what you've been told, is correct? When you regulate it, that's all checked, right? And like I said, massive fines if it's not correct, and including even potential custodial sentences as well. And that's a kind of issue. Another issue I would say people they should ask, right? Especially with some of these kind of unregulated home purchase schemes that people talk about is more authentic, right? I mean, are people aware? Are they making people aware, that if they take a home with them, that they have to pay double stamp duty, right? You don't have to pay double stamp duty if you buy a house in cash with a mortgage or with the Islamic home purchase plan, do they know, are they telling people that they're having to pay capital gains tax on houses, right, that they're buying to live in? Again, you don't have to pay capital gains tax if you buy a house in cash, if you have to buy a house through a mortgage or with an Islamic home purchase plan. Just to explain what capital gains tax is, if you buy your home, just say for £100,000, and in 10 years later, it's now worth £200,000, right? And you sell it. You don't have to pay anything on that, that £100,000 of profit that you made, right? Because it's a home that you live in. But with these new unregulated home purchase plan schemes, you have to pay capital gains tax on the £100,000. And it's a massive amount of tax. And it's unfair. Is that kind of, and it's a question I want to ask your viewers, right? If they've come across these schemes, or if they've taken another product with them, was that detailed to them? Not in fine print, but in very clear text, like we would have to do, like in a regulated firm would have to do, when like a financial information statement or offer letter, where it's made clear exactly what the fees are, what the risks are, and so on. Is that being made clear to them? And if the answer is yes, good for them, but you're still paying an unfair amount of money when you don't need to do it, right? And I think another thing that kind of really irks me, actually, I'm actually, manage the largest number of Islamic finance advisors, ever, and kind of I was part of the training competency scheme and so on, in my previous role. And so I tend to know, I probably know more about Islamic finance property advice than probably anyone in the country right now. And what does irk me, and I've spoken to scholars about this as well, is where one of the things that some of these non-regulated Islamic, non-regulated home purchase plan schemes kind of talk about what makes a product more authentic is that, they say, we don't have an obligation for a customer to buy the property, right? So
people could effectively be renting in love too.
So, but then what they don't, but let me just go to the fine print with it, right? And I want to know, how this been explained to people. So if you take out a property right now, and what they'll say to you is, I just make up some numbers, your rent is £600 a month, for example, right? And then your portion to purchase a property, right? Just say is £600 for argument's sake. Just say similar to us. Just say.
Yeah.
But at any time you can stop paying that portion of buying the house. There's no obligation to buy. But are they telling you your rent then increases, right? From 600 to I can't remember what the rate is, but let's say £800 a month, and they call that, we've taken away the discount. That's not a discount, guys. If that was a regulated product, what's that seen as? A penalty, right? And I would never offer that as a product, right? Because that's a penalty, for goodness sake, that you're charging people. And honestly, I don't want to use a word, right? I need to hold back, in my true feelings here, because I don't want to get too controversial. But that is genuinely upsetting for somebody who gives, used to give advice, right, on these areas. How can you sell that as a product? Are you making it very clear to them what's going to happen if you don't do it? And the fact that it's not a discount they've removed. I mean, it's quite perverse, actually. They swapped it around, right, by saying, it's a discount we're giving you, we remove the discount. No, the rate is 600, right? And the other 200 is a penalty, not a removal of a discount. But also what happens is they say, if you can't even pay the rent or element of it, we're going to take the rent out of the equity of the property, right? But at what rate? At the higher rate of the £800, not the £600, right? Honestly, this is such an unfair situation to be in for customers. And the problem is that because they're not regulated, right? They are not providing financial advice. Now, I told you before, what did the mortgage market review, by the regulator come back with? Over 90% of customers are not financially literate enough to choose a mortgage product. Now, Islamic finance, especially these unregulated home finance schemes, actually are a lot more complicated, right? So if people aren't, if they need advice to choose a mortgage product, you definitely need advice on these more complicated, unregulated products as well, but they're not getting the advice, and recommendations about how much to take out, what product they should go for, what term they should go for, whatever. And are they being, and at this level of intricacy being explained or not? So I remember speaking to some people, including a scholar one day, said, Sheikh, even if I offered that product, right, which I don't agree with, even if I did, I would never advise him to take that element of it out, right? Because it's a wrong thing to do. And you can see they face off as somebody who's in the financial services, right? So that does upset me, because why are Muslims falling for these tricks? Yeah, and sadly, it keeps coming back to, because these scholars have said it's better, and so on and so forth, right? But if it's that good, why is it being regulated, right? And also, again, it was quite sad. I came across a podcast where someone said, if a product is regulated, it's effectively synonymous. It proves that the product isn't Sharia compliant. Now, and I'm sure you came across that probably before as well.
That wasn't one of our podcasts.
No, it wasn't one. Of course, thankfully, I wouldn't expect it to, right? But now I'm hoping that person that said it didn't mean it that way at all, and I hope it was a kind of misspeak. But how irresponsible is it to say that, right? Because a lot of the parts of regulations are actually part of this. They're inherently Islamic anyway. A lot of them are. If anything, Islamic finance takes it further, right? But the consumer protection that you're getting, regulations, a lot of elements. Why would you say that proves that it's not Sharia compliant? It's like opposite. I think this is where Muslims need to be smarter and more sophisticated. With it, and not fall for scams, not fall for, not be naive, right? In falling for these kind of quick marketing, ads, or some kind of some influencers or some scholars who don't know anything about finance, giving some views, right? They need to do proper due diligence and ensure that the firms that they are taking these products out with have the relevant regulations in place.
Sure. The only thing which comes to mind, I had a conversation with the CEO of a large Islamic bank in this country who was kind of joking around and sort of said, well, technically the financial services compensation scheme, that protection that we provide on people's deposits within banks, that's not Sharia compliant. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, because you can't guarantee anything. And he said, so if people were really, really focused on Sharia compliancy, they would, forgo the right to that FSCS protection. That's the only thing where I comes to mind when I think, being regulated makes it.
On that one, that's to do with savings accounts, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's to do with pure savings accounts. Okay, so just going back in that mind, so there is a view that's like that. But if that was the case, you don't have to take the money.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? You don't have to take the money, right? So you said, you're not forced to take the compensation, right? The compensation is in place, but you're not forced to take it. It's the same thing going back to the kind of talk about adoption we're talking about, right? There's options. There's, if you do it in this particular way, in a view, in one particular view, you might be not Sharia compliant, but you don't have to take it, right? So this is So I unfortunately, that argument for me just doesn't stick.
It doesn't wash.
Yeah, it doesn't wash at all.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for being so candid in your response there. I hope in the future we can have more constructive conversations like this with different players in the industry.
Yeah, of course.
And I want to shout out Umar Khalil, who's a longtime friend of the podcast. He's done a couple of episodes with us. He's the founder of Riba Free Foundation, who's doing a lot of good work bringing all the industry players together and getting that one single narrative out to the public. And I think they're doing fantastic work. So everyone should please go check out Riba Free Foundation and what they're doing there.
No, 100%, and I add that. Yeah, I think I did mention Riba Free early on, and that's the kind of organization we're saying, that we're happy to give funding to ultimately, and everybody else should do, where they can give non-branded training on Islamic finance. To just educate people on what Islamic finance is.
Exactly.
Yeah, so,
exactly. I think they're the ones who are going to do it.
That's right.
Exactly. So let's look at the future.
Yeah.
What does the future hold for Offa? Because right now you offer buy-to-let, you offer bridge financing. Are retail mortgages on the cards?
Sure. So we offer buy-to-let, bridge financing, and different types of bridge financing. Some development financing, kind of refurbishment, and so on as well. But as I mentioned, alhamdulillah, we were the first firm in over 7 years to get the UK regulation for Islamic home finance, right? Yeah. Which means we're developing a product right now, which will allow people to buy homes to live in and fully regulated with advice and so on. Also, we're in the middle of launching 5 products this year. It's an extremely busy year.
Wow, okay.
Most products we're ever launching in one go ever. Hence why we're doing a big recruitment drive. So I would say, if you're, for any talented people out there looking for jobs, go on our website, follow us on LinkedIn so you can see the different jobs coming out. Another product we're launching, kind of effectively can't launch, but we're doing a proper launch soon, is a bridge to let as well, where somebody to want to buy a property, on a bridge, they can get the rent, they can exit with the rental with us, the buy-to-let with us immediately. And it's actually, because we're doing it as one product, overall it works out way cheaper than if they were to take out two separate products, right? One bridge and one rent, right? The admin fees lower, the solicitor fees are lower, the kind of valuation fees lower, but also most importantly, the length of your bridge is way shorter.
Oh, really?
As well, right? Okay. So instead of having like minimum 6 months, other providers, you can have it as small as 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months, right? Okay. And that's normally the really expensive part of it. So having the bridge to let, the seamless one, so that's coming out imminently. But there's other products I can't really talk about, that they're all coming out this year. Okay. Now, as you probably know already, we were involved in purchasing the first people ever to purchase an Islamic finance book from Al Burak, which was owned by the Bank of Ireland at the time. And so that was through an acquisition. We were able to onboard over 350 customers, alhamdulillah. Right? And actually, funnily enough, I was actually part of the team that, and it's brutal time, but me and more in the cold phase, where we were the first one to bring these customers on board for Al Burak when I was part of Islamic Bank of Britain. So it's quite nice that we've been able to bring them back home now with us. Yeah. So our growth plans are to be already, inshallah, especially when some of these products are launched, we're offering the widest range of Islamic property finance in the UK. And as we kind of continue launching more property financing products, that will continue, and to make our claim stronger. But our future growth is also to go into other products that are not just purely property finance related, maybe other asset-based products, and also through acquisition. So other acquisitions, like we talked about Al Burak, but even including growing through acquisitions of other companies as well.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And so that's so can't go too much into it, but that's the plan. We want to grow. We want to grow as quick as possible, be over $1 billion in assets very, very soon, and we want to do that through acquisitions as well as organic growth.
Inshallah, amazing. May Allah bless you for your efforts and help you further those. What about a savings account, a retail savings account? Is that something?
Not at this stage, no. Not at this stage. I mean, we're funded well already. Through our shareholders and through other kind of Islamic. We're funded. Our funding from top end is Sharia compliant, right? In terms of how we get the funding and how the customers get it. Is unlike some other providers in the country, we're proud to say that our journey from beginning to end is fully Sharia compliant. So we're okay with that for now. Going forward, savings account, we don't have that in the short term, but you never know. Yeah, I would say you never know. Okay. Because we were amongst the first ones to launch in Islamic savings. So yeah, exactly. I wouldn't say no to that.
And I think for us, it's like the second or third most requested product behind mortgages is a way in which people can grow their money in a Sharia compliant way, and property is a very exciting way of doing that for a lot of people.
Exactly.
So coming up to the final two questions, we'll have to end soon to get ready for Jummah.
Thank you.
So firstly, why is it so important for Muslims to get into the property market? Do you feel that's important for people? Or do you think it's kind of overplayed and we've kind of had this love affair with property for a long time in the Muslim community?
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely important. Look at the foreign investment we're getting in the UK through property, right? I mean, UK, alhamdulillah, has got one of the most mature and stable property markets in the country, right? There's a shortage of homes. It's an island, and basically property prices are just generally, if you look at historically, are just going one way. And it's quite important for Muslims to own a home, to live in, I think, for a sense of security, especially with this rise of Islamophobia that we're seeing in the UK. It's even more important that Muslims have their own homes ultimately. Also, what it does is it kind of protects you from property inflation, right? So if you bought a property, straight away, 5 years later, all the other properties are more expensive now, but yours has gone up in value as well, right? So therefore, when you sell it, that kind of pain of buying this new increased, the more expensive property isn't as bad.
It's offset a little bit because of the value of your own asset has increased.
Exactly right. So I know a lot of people where their first property actually isn't a property that they want to live in. It's actually a buy-to-let because they protect themselves from the inflation. Yeah. And we offer that, by the way, as well, right? We changed the criteria recently to allow first-time buyers to do that. We have so much interest in that.
Really?
To say, look, guys, I'm not ready yet. I'm not married. I'm not ready yet to buy a property to live in, but I want to protect myself from the property inflation. So I want to buy a property, let that grow in value, and so on. The time comes, I can sell it if need be, right? And you use an increase in equity to buy this new properties, which also increase in value. So we change the criteria to allow that to happen as well. So I think, for various different reasons, I think property is actually, from our research that we've done, and I think from your research as well, is an asset class of choice for Muslims in the UK.
It is. And that criteria for the buy-to-let mortgage, that sounds very exciting. I know a lot of our listeners will be interested in that. Can you talk about some of the criteria that, minimum deposit size, salary, what might that be?
Very easy. I mean, look, minimum deposit is 20%, which is amongst the lowest you can get for a buy-to-let in the country.
Sure.
Anyway. The minimum salary requirement is only £18,000, which is actually below minimum wage effectively, right? So kind of anyone can effectively be eligible to get it out. And then, first-time buyers are able to take it out. They can even take out normal buy-to-lets, on a limited company structure. They can even take it out on a HMO. You can even have British expats actually who live abroad who want to buy a property in the UK. They can do that. Really? So it's a very wide range of products we offer to quite a lot of people. And the British residents don't even have to be British citizens, so there can be people who've got residency in the UK. If they want to take it out buy-to-let, they can.
That's incredible.
And the other thing is, the way that we do affordability criteria, the documentation as a whole is quite easy. It's, we made it simple. So a lot of our customers in London, especially, the rental yields aren't high to meet affordability criteria. Now, I won't go through the intricacies. It's quite easy. If they go on a website, www.offa.co.uk, there's calculators that will tell them, right? Now, if their rental income in the property in London, for example, right, isn't enough to hit the requirements for us for affordability, that doesn't mean they can't take out the finance. What we do, which is quite unique, is we allow something called income or top-up. So where there's a shortfall of rental income, we will take into calculation their personal income. So if they really want to buy a property, especially the ones in London, the yields are weak, but the appreciation is good, we will still let them do that.
Very nice.
Also, I think the uniqueness with what we offer within the conventional and Islamic world is something called gifted equity. So obviously, gifted deposits is standard, right? You want to deposit, get it from a sibling or get it from a parent, no problem.
Sure.
What we offer, interestingly, is if you imagine your dad's got a property worth 200k.
Yeah.
He says, I'll sell it to you for 100. So you come to us, right? Now, most banks in the country and Islamic finance providers, they will say, all right, fine. Maybe some will say yes, some will say no. If they want to say yeah, we'll let you buy that for 100k. Say, you still need to put 20% deposit in. Right? We'll say, no, actually. All right? You've got 50% equity already. It's worth 200, you're getting it for 100. Yeah? So you don't need to put any deposit down. And the rate we're offering you is of a rate with that level of deposit. So you said, you get the lowest rate product as well.
Wow.
So we allow effectively gifted equity, is what we explain, right? Again, it's very unique in the market and very, very popular with our Muslim customers.
And are you location agnostic? Could it be anywhere in the UK?
In England and Wales, not Scotland yet, unfortunately. And we were the first people, by the way, to launch home finance and commercial property finance in Scotland. The Scottish law is different, right? So our contracts have to be redone to comply with Scottish law. So our plans are to move into Scotland next year, inshallah, for sure. So watch that space. But for now, only it's available anywhere in England and anywhere in Wales.
Okay, Sagheer, final question for you. Is there a story about money from the Quran, the Hadith, or just Islamic history? We talked about King Offa already. But is there something that's really inspirational to you?
About money? There's so many, as you talked about, when it comes to charity. I think there's, and I forget the name of the Sahaba now, where it was after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, I think, and it was a very rich Sahaba, and he brought in so the Sahabas came out and they could hear an earthquake almost, right, in Medina coming in, right? But what's happening? It felt like an earthquake in Medina. Wow. And they looked at it, and it wasn't an earthquake, it was a caravan of goods coming in, and these goods were all owned by this one Sahaba. His business had done so well, right? And it's unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the Sahaba right now, but he basically had brought in so much goods that it was literally almost shaking the earth. And then he kind of spoke to other Sahabas and found out what he was and how well he'd done. And he found out some of the needs that people had. And what he decided to do was he decided to give the whole amount.
Everything,
of this biggest caravan to have ever come into Medina. He had just given the whole thing away to charity ultimately, right? And I'm sure, and that's just an example of some kind of generosity, mashallah, was a wealthy man and he still gave a lot away, and having the taqwa to know that he will get richer, right? At the back of it, he's not going to get poorer because of it. He's an amazing one. But I think a different ayah from the Quran that isn't necessarily linked to money, but there is a link, especially with my life and others, is from Surah Imran in ayah 139, which is, so do not become weak, nor be sad, and you will be superior if you are indeed true believers. And that, if I look at my WhatsApp, status, it's been like that for years, it's a reminder for me always. It's a reminder for kind of other people if I speak to them, right? And I've been through a lot of changes and issues, throughout life, including when it comes to money as well. Especially when you're getting a hard time for maybe, the community or your family, and about money, for example, right? Why don't you kind of take on a bigger pay rise and so on? And this is a good reminder for me, right? To stay strong, not to be sad, not to be weak. And obviously it can be applied to a lot of stuff that's happening, And for me, and it's a personal example I talk about, the first time I came across something like this wasn't actually the IR, but the lesson, and it was from my dad. So when I was in my kind of school days, I was diagnosed with ADHD, right?
Oh, no.
Doctors tried to prescribe me medicine, but dad was very against it. And that's something he taught me, right? About firstly, he said, don't be sad. And he says, listen, weakness, having an issue doesn't make you weak, right? But feeling sorry for yourself and giving into it, that's what makes you weak, right? So you could have one leg, one arm, that doesn't make you weak. But giving into it, the sadness, the grief, the depression and whatnot, that's the weakness. So don't be weak. And throughout my life, I came across that with friends for various different things and so on. And now, alhamdulillah, I can say, never properly been medicated for ADHD, mashallah, not any meds. And if anything, it's been a strength for me.
Yeah.
It's been a strength for me when I've even wanted to adopt and so on, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all like, you understand this type of things better than most. But it's also been a strength in terms of the way I work, the level of energy I have, mashallah, and so on. So I would say, and it's helped me throughout my whole life. There are various different things that happen, but that's an advice. And my favorite ayah of the Quran is that one, right? Is not to be weak and remember that you will be successful if you're a true believer. And that's where the tawakkul comes in. The same with giving the money away to charity and so on, right? And that's there. It's not totally linked to Islamic finance or money, but there has been a link for me. But on a greater scheme, that is my favorite ayah of the Quran.
Subhanallah, what a beautiful way to end this episode.
Exactly.
Sagheer, thank you so much for your time.
Assalamu
alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you for listening to the Muslim Money Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, then please subscribe to Muslim Money Talk wherever you might have been listening to this. Give us a like and share it with someone who you think might be interested. It really, really helps us out. Thank you, assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.